Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a moment and then we will get started. Hello, and thank you all for joining us today for the second part of the three-part end-to-end RFID solution-focused webinar series, High Performance, Cost-Effective, Scalable End-to-End Solutions. In yesterday's session, we discussed Axia's pilot's 100% traceability achievement with essential data on tags. Today, we build on the Axia RFID DSCSA pilot study to explore how RAIN RFID enhances efficiency and security with distributors' operations, while emphasizing GS1 standards for interoperability to enable seamless benefits across the entire pharmaceutical supply chain. Just a few logistics before we begin. We anticipate the presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, allowing 15 minutes for questions. Please kindly submit using the chat box on the control panel on your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Additionally, the call is being recorded and it will be made available to the public following the close of the presentation. On behalf of the RAIN Alliance, I am pleased to introduce to you our moderator, Dirk Bratt from CCL eAgile, who will now introduce the panelists. I'll turn it over to you now, Dirk.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to the RAIN Alliance for hosting, and thank you to those who have joined today's webinar. Hopefully you're able to attend the first session. As she said, in case you missed it, this entire three-part series will be posted to the RAIN Alliance website here sometime in the near future. So I'm guessing that most of us have not looked too far beyond the packaging of our medications after confirming the drug name, trying to pronounce it, then finding the dosing instructions. We may also do a quick check of the expiration date, especially if it's sat around in our medicine cabinets for a while. And in looking for that, we may have picked up on barcodes and a lot number printed on the packaging. But the exploration of pharma packaging as consumers typically ends there, but the information that is added to the pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and over-the-counter medications is a critical tool to the medication supply chain, the healthcare systems, and especially to the pharmacists and caregivers who manage and administer them. Today, we're going to be discussing how RAIN RFID-enabled tags encoded with essential data like GTIN, lot, expiry, serial numbers make the drug supply chain from manufacturer to distribution more efficient and more secure. And all this was done using existing GS1 standards to demonstrate how the entire supply chain can access and gain the benefits of this essential data. Let's start by introducing today's three panelists. First, we have Andrew Meyer, Director of Global Standards at GS1 US. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
Next, we have Sean Murphy, Senior Manager of Manufacturing of Operations at Cencora. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
And our third panelist today is Aaron Sundman, RFID Business Development Leader at CCL eAgile. Welcome, Aaron.
Greetings, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
And thank you all for taking time today to join our roundtable discussion. So let's begin with our first topic. So during our first discussion, we covered how the Axia pilot study proved it is possible to use RAIN RFID to speed up processes in an actual healthcare warehouse. In fact, I believe the study, which was scheduled to go for 2 days, was actually completed in just a single day, which is remarkable for a first run of a new process using new software where volunteers had to learn how to be healthcare distributors on the fly. And all of you here today had pivotal roles in the Axia RFID DSCSA study and this critical aspect of the study, which was performed inside of the actual Cencora facility. And since we have Sean from Cencora on the panel, I will start with you. And the question is, what was your immediate takeaway from the Axia pilot, Sean?
Yeah, first of all, I'm just so happy that we were able to host you guys. I think it added a lot of value to have the study conducted in an actual warehouse around people who would actually be doing the receiving, who could kind of weigh in on how the whole process worked. And for sure, my biggest takeaway, the one that's hard to look past, is just how easy it was to use. You kind of referenced the 2 initial days that we had planned for this whole process. None of us were terribly familiar with receiving product, picking product, packaging product. And the RFID technology made it very easy. So we were able to bring that in. We were able to efficiently move it through and achieve that 100% traceability against EPCIS files that we were receiving in what is normally a pretty complicated process. I think DSCSA has added a ton of value to the supply chain. It's made it safer and it's made it more secure. But without question, it's made it more complicated. And that's the number one complaint we get from our frontline associates is how much harder it is to receive product in the serialized traceable world. And so it was incredible for us, and I think for some of the warehouse staff as well, to see how RFID can combat that and how it can make what has become kind of a complicated process almost idiot proof. I mean, we still made a few mistakes, but the technology really stepped in when we mispicked that product. We knew right away, and it was so easy to step in and correct it. So I was truly impressed by the ease of use.
Human nature always finds a way to make a problem and to do an error, but in this case it was good because it allowed you to isolate them and fix them on the fly and improve out the study. Now, Aaron, you come from a unique background. You have experience in both worldwide distribution and RFID. What were your key takeaways from the study?
Well, first of all, idiot proof is definitely directed at me. I feel like my ability to pick and pack was non-existent, so I'm glad we had systems that could validate everything, because I mean, really, that's what I learned when I was there, right? Receiving product was really, really simple. I mean, it was basically you take the box up and you set it down on the conveyor. In fact, let me just show a picture of what that looked like. I'm not going to run through a whole thing, but I just want to show you what it looked like. This is the conveyor we used there at Axios. I mean, I'm sorry, at Cencora. So basically what we do is we set it in there and it would run through here. It would stop for about 2 seconds and it would read everything in there. So we went through, grabbed every single serial number, every single G10, the entire thing, validated all of that. And then it looked at the EPCIS data file and it checked it, right? So it looked for the parent and said, okay, let me go look at the EPCIS parent file and now grab me all the children and look through and validate that every single one is in there. And if there's anything incorrect, it'll stop it, turn around and turn red and say, no, that's not right. So here's the reality of what you'd end up doing is to use something like this instead of using what we did, where we just rolled in a conveyor. You'd actually set this up inside of probably just associated to the rest of your conveyoring system. So you don't have to have it one thing that have to know what to do. You just basically set it down the conveyor and the system will do the rest. So I wanted to show you what that looked like kind of from what we did. Oh, it's zooming in on me. What we did as well as the way you would probably end up working it. But I think what's interesting was this idea of not just receiving, but when it shipped out. It was really important on shipping to actually validate because we had 4 pallets of drugs. And we had actually real drugs because Fresenius Kabi got real drugs for us and we had to tag them all up. And when you sent them back out as a mixed tote, like with 40 of hydrogenate, 20 of these, it was a big ask for a bunch of corporate stooges to make this work. But the validation really worked amazingly well because if it didn't see the exact right mix, it turned it around and said, no, you got to fix this before it leaves your place. And at the same time, if it did and it worked, it would actually grab all the serial numbers to make aggregation simple. And that's what we did. And I think the fact that it all did it in one day when we had hotels scheduled, we had reservations at hotels, we had to cancel all of those because it only took one day. And this was the very first time it was done. So that was one of the things that was really neat about this. And again, Sean, and Cencora, thanks for letting us do it. I mean, it was really an amazing opportunity to go in and see it first person and be there watching it and actually doing it.
We were very happy to be partners and hoping to have everyone back for the next stage as well.
So Andrew, had to be interesting to see this unfold from concept to real world environment from your perspective. What did you take from the study?
Well, yeah, I thought it was pretty amazing because the whole idea of balancing this on top of the DSCSA framework that exists today, where you have an EPCIS document on the back end that lists every single SG-tin that you're expecting to receive, or on the outbound that you're going to be building or that you've built, and then taking that and using RFID that's been encoded with GS1 standards to actually make that validation against those EPCIS documents is pretty amazing to watch. Especially, one of the most common questions I get is how accurate were the reads? How many reads did you get whenever you passed a whole tote through or you passed through a case? And the reality is that we had 100% read rate on the products that we sent through. And so being able to do that validation on the reception at Cencora against the file that they received or that Aaron and I built for the product going to them. Really enabled, if this was the real world, it would have really enabled any kind of exceptions to get caught on the front end, which is very powerful because in the real world, you don't have time to look at every single bottle or scan every single barcode. And there's security reasons and other reasons why you might not want to do that, because you don't want to open up cases unless you have to open up cases. And so in those scenarios, exceptions wouldn't have been found until those cases were actually opened or those orders were picked or whatever it was that would have triggered the actual scanning of the barcode on those. And so for me, the takeaway is that if you can trap exceptions on the front end, when you still have the parent container there with them, that means that you have valuable information you can feed to your manufacturer, your supplier trading partner that you wouldn't otherwise have, which means exception mitigation or exception solutions can move much quicker than they can whenever you just have an orphan bottle that you don't know which case it came from, which shipment it was on, et cetera. And so that was really my takeaway, is just speed to solution for exceptions would be greatly amplified by being, or shortened by being able to do this.
You know, that's a really good point on there. If you just had one bottle and it wasn't a part of that aggregation, you don't know which one it came from then. I mean, it would be obvious if it were in one of the aggregations because it was obviously already in the aggregation. So you're talking about now a problem of I just have this bottle and I don't even know what to tell people how I got it, where it came from. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, these concealed exceptions are a big problem, and they're a gap in the current framework, because as we're receiving product in, as Andrew mentioned, we're not necessarily splitting open every single case that we're getting. Some cases might come to us and they might go out our door as a case, which means if we have a misaggregation, that might not get fined until it's at the customer, which is the worst case scenario, because now we have to try to tie it back. We don't have data, and it reduces patient safety. It reduces our customer experience. And it's the most complicated exception to try to resolve. And the RFID really steps in there and eliminates that as a potentiality.
Did anybody expect 100%?
Well,
everybody hoped for it, but did it?
So I was writing out the code and I'm like, okay, if I got to do 100%, I mean, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm like really focused on 100%. And I didn't even have access to the drugs because we didn't have them in our warehouse, right? It was all over at Axia's. And so we're writing all this stuff. I'm like, well, do I program it so that we can step down to 90% in case we can't read 100%? I mean, I started coding all of that and go, well, we want to have all the options available, right? Yeah, of course we want 100%. But you want to be able to say, maybe we have to get 85 because I don't know what the answer is. It ended up 100% was almost trivial. I mean, it just went through and it turned green and we're like, what just happened? Everything is working.
Yeah. And I wonder if you did something wrong. It's like, is this actually working?
Yeah, and I know early on, Aaron, you and I discussed that to a certain extent because, in our early discussions, you were like, well, do we have to have 100%? And I think I was referencing the fact that today you have spot checking of serial numbers on the sides of cases, and you have other things that whoever the receiver is, they sample enough to make themselves secure that the EPCIS file is solid enough for them to be able to receive those goods in. And so there is I don't believe, and Sean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that there's any company doing 100% vetting of even all the cases that come in on a full pallet, let alone the contents. And so that's where for us to have gotten 100% on this test or on this pilot is, to me, amazing.
Yeah, and I will say we are scanning 100% of the cases that are coming through our warehouse doors. But to your point, certainly we're not splitting those cases up at induction. So the RFID, it really removes any question from that step.
Well, thanks for your insights. Let's got kind of our next segment here, next topic to move on. And GS1 standards drive the world's supply chains. The GS1 tagline I saw on the website is the global language of business. And quite frankly, without GS1 standards, it's hard to imagine what international supply chains would look like. For our next segment, let's discuss how GS1 standards enhance security when paired with RAIN RFID. So It's a good one for Andrew to start. What are your thoughts about RAIN RFID coupled with GS1 standards to help make supply chains more secure?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of points. One, you're able to, whenever you apply RFID, you're enabling the automatic capture of data or automatic capture of visibility of products as they move through the supply chain. So visibility plus time equals traceability. And the more you can automate that and the more that you can create workflows around that automation means the more visibility you have products. So you know whenever they enter the supply chain, you know whenever they're diverted from the supply chain, because you're able to more accurately capture real-time data about those products and not bog down your workers that have other workflows that they're trying to push through. The second piece to that is that, you know, there's the patient safety, the security part of that. So if you have recalls or expired products sitting around, it's much easier to utilize a tool like RFID rather than barcodes, to be able to track and gain that visibility and kind of signal to you if you have a handheld device. And so you gain the patient safety aspect. The other piece to RFID is that because if you have the data elements that are required for DSCSA, and you really wanted to go a little bit nuts, if you had something that you had a question about, and either you thought maybe it was suspect or illegitimate based on how the DSCSA is written, then you could use that tag to do the automatic ping up to a VRS service or something else, just to check to make sure that that is a product that at least the manufacturer recognizes, and so that you can move it through correctly. And then the last thing I'll say, this is not something that anybody does today, but if you're a brand and you're worried about protecting your brand and you have a product that is counterfeited on a regular basis, there is one added level to the tag that goes beyond the 4 pieces of product identification required by the DSCSA, and that would be the TID, so the tag ID. If you're a manufacturer and you're encoding the tags, you could always capture the TID, and then if there's a question about that product, then in turn, whenever you're doing your investigation and you ask for that product back, you can verify that yes, that is in fact the tag that we did encode that product identification to. So there's several different layers that you can gain using RFID, but a lot of the real benefit for the full supply chain is around being able to automate, being able to not necessarily rely on humans with scanners to do the work. You can have automated systems, even employ AI or something else to be able to work with you on the back end to watch for changes in the way that the product behaves in comparison to the rest of the products of that type.
Very true. Sean, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this from your perspective.
Absolutely. From my point of view, it's hard to imagine how DSCSA would have functioned without GS1. FDA outlined what they wanted. They wanted a serialized supply chain. They wanted interoperability. But what exactly that means was kind of left for industry to decide. So without an entity like GS1 in the supply chain to say, hey, this is an international standard, that it doesn't matter where you sit or who you are, this is how you speak the same language. We wouldn't be here today. And wherever we would have found ourselves would have been less efficient and more expensive. And I think really the advantage to it's easy for me to say all the ways that GS1 and GS1 standards help Cencora. But I think they really help the small entities in the supply chain, the small customers, because frankly, we have a big network at Cencora. If we wanted to create our own standard, it's going to be less efficient, but it's going to cost us less than the small guy who has to understand all the different wholesalers, all the different manufacturer standards. That one standard really helps just make the system cheap and efficient and safe for everybody. So it would be a much more costly and less efficient supply chain without GS1 stepping into that spot.
And yeah, one other piece that I'll add to that, Sean. Thank you for everything that you just said, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not paid, I promise.
But yeah, at the end of the day, the reality is that GS1 standards permeate much further than most people realize. And so foundationally, the barcode requirements that the FDA has, those are underpinned by GS1 standards. And then whenever you step into the pieces of the DSCSA where you have a data matrix that's encoded onto the side of the lowest saleable unit, or even the GS1 128s that you see on the side of the cases or the shippers. All of that already existed in the supply chain, and really for laws like the DSCSA, the big change is how do you share that information in a way that is usable by the entire supply chain. And Sean, to your point, it's a globally recognized set of standards, and so EPCIS naturally leaned into that. And so that was the other side of being able to help with the journey on the DSCSA as well. So yeah.
So an interesting part there, that the TID, I think one thing I think it should be known is that the TID can't be changed, right? It was built into the chip back at the manufacturer wherever they were made, the chips were. So you can't change those. So if you could actually record that TID and tie it to that serial number, you've got an almost infallible connection that you can validate with, right? So this is one of those things that the GS1's important, but there's layers of depths of value that this technology also brings. But I also want to say an interesting thing about the GS1 standard, right? So when we were shipping out those totes, remember we had all those items. We had 40 hydroxyline, 40 centrafazone. I don't even know how to say these drugs still, even after dealing with this. But the crazy part about it is all these different mixed totes. If we had to actually do lookups, oh, this is where it gets really dramatic if it zooms in on me. If you had to do lookups for every one of those in some API call to somewhere, you would have never gotten a real-time response. Because I had to, in 3 seconds, I had to read every one of those things, validate the date, check the serial number, check against the EPCIS data file, or the expected order. I would have not been able to accomplish any of that. So because of the serial numbers, the validation, the way the GS1 standards works, because the EPCIS data file has all the stuff we need to be able to validate against the data that's on the chip. There's no lookup anywhere else. There's no requirement as long as you're following all of that. And if you want to also validate the expiration and lot at the same time, that's also in the EPCIS data file in the header, in the commissioning event. So you see, you've got all of this. As long as you're doing a direct comparison, there's no need to look up anywhere. The data's right on there. And the EPCIS data file allows you to transfer and look all the way back to the manufacturer. So you don't have any gap. And that was all standards followed by GS1 to make this work so well.
And those response times are huge because the volume in the supply chain is massive, and we can't slow product down. All that results in poor patient impacts. So really, those response times have to be sub-second. Yeah, and again, that's assisted by GS1 standards in addition to others.
Well, and that's the power of having the information out at the edge rather than in a registry somewhere. Is that in this example, you don't need all the master data. All you need is the GTIN or the NDC, depending on which barcode you're looking at, and the serial number, expiration date, batch lot, and having those pieces of data on the actual tag itself allows you to do a one-to-one match to the EPCIS file. And again, you don't need any master data to go with that. It's just it's almost a straight number lookup at that point.
I'm going to do this odd connection here. Unit of sale, right? We're talking about hundreds of items in that tote as it was leaving. I think the max number we had 120, I think, when we were leaving Cencora. Now imagine if you had to go to unit of use. That'd be 10 to 20 times the number of items. Now, we wouldn't be reading that same number, but imagine the amount of calls you'd have to make through the supply chain, but then also in the rest of the pharmaceutical or the healthcare industry for unit of use items tracking. You're much more efficient to have it readable on the edge, on the chip, available in 1/100th of a second without making any internet call, any lookup anywhere. So it extends pretty far, really, really big numbers very quickly once you leave unit of sale and go into unit of use.
Absolutely.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I can't imagine if everybody had their own process, their own system, everything had to be decoded, everything had to be looked up individually to do that in a real-time scenario. And I think you guys would have been there a couple extra days. Let's just say that.
I would have kept my hotel.
Well, let's get on to our next topic here. And we talk a lot about interoperability, but what does this really mean? So I did what we all do, and I asked Google to define it in simple words. And what I got back was interoperability refers to the standards, protocols, technologies, and mechanisms that allow data to flow between diverse systems with minimal human intervention, allowing them to talk to each other and share information in real time, which I thought was interesting. It's almost like my phone is listening to me at times. I don't know what's going on, but it tied it in well. So, Andrew, we'll have you lead this off. Why is interoperability via the GS1 standards critical for widespread RFID adoption? And how did this kind of tie back to the Axia pilot and amplify it?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a step away from the Axia pilot first and to kind of answer the adoption question and how interoperability ties into that. Anytime you have proprietary systems or commercial systems that each have their own way of doing things, essentially, the gold standard here is to have the manufacturer source tagging. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you want them to be willing to serialize, you want them to see the value, and you want them to have a clear path forward. As long as you have offerings that don't have a standardized way of encoding, then essentially the manufacturer has to pick and choose who they want to encode for and who their more important customers are. And if that happens, then they have to have those discussions with their board members or whomever to figure out who they want to cut out of the possible functionality that they're gaining from those tags. And where interoperability comes in is that if those systems are capable of receiving GS1 encoded tags, that means that the manufacturers don't have to figure out who they're going to not give functionality to and who they are going to give functionality to. It allows them to do a single encoding that should hopefully be able to wash through the supply chain. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the second piece that I'll touch around the Axia pilot is because this was focused on the DSCSA, and you do have the product identifier or the SNI, whichever way you want to look at it, required by the law. And there is the requirement to match up the G10 plus serial number plus other information to exactly what's inside the EPCIS file. It doesn't make sense to use a different encoding methodology because you want your edge to be functional. So you want your operators out on the floor to be able to work without having to do lookups, that they can do an apples to apples comparison without having to dig into a backend database. And so for this pilot, it made sense because the underpinnings of a lot of what's going on with the DSCSA are already GS1 standards in action. And so it just made sense to carry that on. And then the last thing that I'll bring up that makes sense for why you want to standardize is with the applications that exist today and drug shortages and other things that come into play. The encodings don't necessarily jump from one system to another whenever you're not using a standardized way of encoding. And so essentially you lose the value. Now, I know that many of those systems give access to people so that they can pull down information, but that's also a way it slows you down. And if it's not, if there's one thing that hospitals work on, it's trying to create the most efficient workflow that they can have in play so that their people can do the same thing again and again and again and again. And that way there's less mistakes and other things. And so if they have to go out of their way to pull information, they'll more likely just figure out a way not to use the tag that's existing or treat that bottle in a different way so that they can follow their regular workflow and not worry about pulling down that back end data. So if you have standardized data on the barcodes or in the tags, that means that most likely they already have a formulary somewhere with that NDC or that G10 sitting in it, and they can just tie directly back to the master data that they already have.
Wow. Well, so I want to mention something about the interoperability. One thing I found when I joined this company was we had a lot of systems that are already built out there and a lot of APIs and stuff like this. But the reality was because GS1 is so interoperable, I didn't even, when I was starting to code stuff, I didn't even have to call any of our internal databases. I could actually just write a decoder. I downloaded the PDF and started looking at the GS1 TDS 2.0 decoder, and I'm like, I could just write my own little library. I mean, the ability, as anybody can pick it up, any small manufacturer, anyone can pick it up and do it, because it's not so difficult. They have to pay a huge amount of money to get something. You can actually have anyone write something and do validation against it. So even inside one office, the interoperability made it so much more efficient, because I loved having the ability to decode it myself. I wanted to learn about it anyway. So this allows for it. It doesn't have to be a big business; it can be a small one as well. And that allows for smaller participants, like Sean was mentioning earlier. Everything doesn't go toward just the big companies that you're going to optimize for. But when you use interoperability, like the GS1 standards, it actually works for everybody, even the smallest of small businesses, a single person who wants to add value to the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And we touched on that a little earlier, that what standardization and interoperability really does is make a cheap, efficient, functioning system. It allows any node in the supply chain to benefit. They can, as Andrew mentioned, it makes it easier to tie it back to your master data. Whether you're a wholesaler, you're a dispenser, you're a manufacturer, you've got other bigger problems, more complicated problems that you want to focus in on. We don't want to contribute to that any more than we absolutely have to. And the way you get there is with standardization and interoperability. And in particular with DSCSA, we have that other level where we have a legal requirement to meet interoperability standards. And it just contributes to, regardless of what node you are in the supply chain, you can establish custody, a chain of custody of that product. You know where it's been. It helps facilitate investigations where necessary. It's almost hard to imagine an area that isn't positively impacted by standardizing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking about the one when UPS was talking about it, when they were starting to implement our RFIDs and using the standard. Now, they don't use the standards on this, but the idea was being able to go, we can remove 20 million manual scans a day by putting RFID in, right? So this was like, these kind of things, the ability to, you magnify the ability of having interoperability with the ability of having ambient reads, so that you don't have to take a manual discrete effort for every single scan. It changes innumerably how big of an efficient change that comes along.
Sure. And worth mentioning on that as well is just the employee experience. Not a lot of employees want to sit there and pull apart a pallet and scan every single case on that pallet. It's just easier. It makes everybody's life, again, just more easy.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's a lot of barcode scanners hanging around the Cencora facility and hanging off the hips of the different folks here. I think would they be open to RFID, just putting something through a tunnel and being able to put that barcode scanner to the side?
We would love to find more ways that we could supplement our existing systems with RFID. The scanners are great. We've spent the last 10 years building a system around line of sight scanning. That's how DSCSA is operated. The compliance requirements in the text of the law are around the 2D barcodes. But those read rates are massive for us. And we're finding instances, especially in our temperature control areas, where those inkjet printers don't do quite as well. And something that now could be considered a damaged product because we're unable to scan that barcode, RFID would allow us to potentially keep that product in the supply chain. Not only making those scans easier, faster, more cost effective for us, I think ultimately we don't want to create shortages for patients. And I think that the RFID really allows us to continue maximizing what we can deliver downstream to our customers. So we're very interested. There's other areas that we think RFID can supplement the business that we're currently operating. But as far as the DSCSA component goes, it's really got to come from manufacturers. They're going to have to initiate this. They're going to have to start tagging at scale their product, so that we can start adopting those systems in our warehouse to really take advantage.
Seems like that's the only way it really gets there, right? Yeah. If let's just say you decided, hey, well, we'll do some on our own. Like half the benefit's already gone, right? I mean, the thing about you being like Cencora being in the middle is you have to receive mix it all together and send it out. So you've got to have all of the systems connected, all of the EPCS reading and creating and validating all the pieces. I mean, it feels like this is one of those that you would have a better picture than literally anybody else because you have to deal with all sides.
Yeah, we always talk about DSCSA like a bit of a relay race, right? The person running with the baton, it has to originate from the manufacturer, and then it gets passed down the line, and nobody can drop it along the way. So we're very supportive. Anything that we can do to get it more widespread in the industry, we're very behind. But I do think it is going to have to be a manufacturer-led effort.
Yeah. Well, and Sean, that makes a lot of sense. I know from my time in the wholesale distribution space, you can't create bespoke workflows for classes of product unless, you know, you mentioned cold chain. And I'm not going to answer the question in the chat right now, but this also leans towards that. The only way that RFID becomes truly useful, at least whenever I look at my old life, is that you have to have some level of saturation to where it's a primary driver for how you design workflows, because you can't receive one manufacturer's product one way and then have 3 different ways that you're receiving other people's product as well. And so if you can find niches like cold chain, schedule, the vault product, or whatever it is, where you can get enough saturation that will allow people to pilot workflows. But to your point, Sean, you have to have the manufacturers on board.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's reference that question right there. So one question that was in there: how might RFID enhance traceability for controlled substances specifically? So this is one where we're connecting cold chain value, controlled substances. So this is, I mean, so if there was, let's just say, for example, there was a way that you didn't have to go whole hog, and you didn't have to fill everything, doesn't have to be RFID. Where would you start? And it might be very well be in controlled substances. And that I don't know, Sean, what you feel about that, but it's one of those things where if you were going to track one of them, of all the things, it would probably either be cold chain or controlled substances. And what's your take on that bit?
Yeah, I think it's those scenarios where you have high demand, high dollar, high vulnerability product would be a good place to start with this. The things that excite me about the controlled substance aspect of this is the location data that I think RFID potentially adds to the equation. That potentially I can know when that bottle leaves its bay. I can know when it walks through a door. I have a lot more information about the life of where that bottle is going and has been. And I do think that that's a great use case for how we could add value beyond compliance, right? We've spent a lot of time talking about how DSCSA complicates the network. It creates safer patient outcomes, which is priority number 1, but it does create a more complicated supply chain. So once we get over that hurdle of just making DSCSA work, how do we take all this extra data that we now have access to and add value? In particular, that value beyond just the patient safety and the compliance with DSCSA. And for me, scannability and location tracking, especially for controlled substances, would be massive.
Yeah, and I'll add to that a little bit. If you look at our friends over in the apparel space, right? One thing that you do have to do with at least C2s is a daily cycle count. If they're tagged, you know, in apparel, they cycle count using RFID in most retail stores that I go to. And for those of you that aren't geeks, next time you go to your local place and pick up a shirt, hold the tag up to the light, and I'm willing to bet you that there's an RFID tag inside of the hang tag that lives on that shirt. But that's how they do a lot of their cycle counting. And in those high dollar, high risk areas, there are regulatory cycle count requirements, but on top of that, you may have other reasons that you want to cycle count schedules 3 through 5 more than you would regularly. And in those scenarios, and even whenever you think about quarantine for DSCSA, having tagged products that are actually letting you know this is where I'm at and this is how many of us there are there, it becomes a really good way to automate reporting. And then to Sean's point, I mean, we use I don't think there are too many places that aren't using badge in, badge out, which is another form of RFID, but you can tie all of that together based on who's picking the order, what exact SG tins are going into an order. To Sean's point, if it gets moved on a cart or goes on a conveyor, you know the second it leaves, you know where it lives on the conveyor until it gets to wherever it's going to be packed. And so you get a much more complete visibility picture if you use RFID. But I've always been a proponent to the vault going tagged because of the nature of those products and the kind of challenges you face if something does go wrong and the implications that that can have around licensing and other things.
I'm going to bring up one of those things that I brought up last time is the light switch thing. Just this is one of those things that's also tagged. This was 47 cents. So I bought this for 47 cents at Walmart, and it has a serialized RFID tag that's tracked throughout the supply chain. Now, it can't be because this is worth so much that you have to, you know, this goes in somebody's veins. This is not that case. This is a piece of plastic with a couple of screws, but it's important enough for the supply chain at Walmart to be able to do this, that they're requiring people to do it right now. That's about the cheapest one I found, but there's probably more in less expensive items that are even there right now.
Yeah, and I think that's an example of how potentially some of this can be customer-led as well, right? Walmart is saying it's so important for our supply chain to be able to receive or move or cycle count product in this fashion that that gets passed up the supply chain and people start creating those labels accordingly.
Yeah, if they don't want to order it in their online cart at Walmart and get there and not have it show up, the tag is the way to go. But you take the implication even further to life-saving critical medications, and I want to know where they are when they're arriving and all the data. And that's when a tag becomes worthwhile. Even not that light switches aren't important, but we all need them. Well, we've got a few minutes here for some Q&A. Let's see what we brought in here. And here's one. Let's see. How could this RFID approach be adapted for other healthcare supply chains like medical devices or vaccines, something beyond pharmaceuticals?
I think the advantages to one aren't exclusive there, right? Anything that it does to make the RX supply chain better, it's also going to do to make med devices, any of those other things. So I think you can kind of pilot it in one area, and once those advantages become obvious, I don't see how those would be any different for those other areas in the healthcare supply chain.
Yeah, it may be a little bit different in some ways. I know a lot of the products that are tagged at the unit of use level today are usually products that people don't encounter in their local pharmacy. You're usually not awake whenever you need these products, or they're there to put you to sleep. So there's that piece. Maybe the security is a little bit different that you need around them, but I think whenever you look at the inventory management pieces that RFID helps enable around that automation, I think it becomes very valuable to understand, you know, how many if you're looking at vaccines, how many doses do I have in one given place, especially whenever you look at how the pandemic went and having to be able to triage and understand where you needed to get X number of doses by what time, because you could watch flare-ups on the maps to understand. And I know, Sean, some of your compatriots were very intimate with that and trying to route your product around. But if you had RFID to tell you where you had stockpiles and exactly what those cycle counts were, it would allow you to move much more quickly, much more efficiently, and you would be surprised less by, oh wait, we thought we had this many here, but really we have X. So there are advantages. And then whenever you talk about med device, there are some companies today that currently do utilize RFID for med device, and they utilize it for billing and some other pieces, because typically some med devices, at least ones like ones that you actually like hips or whatever that is, whatever it is that you're inserting into somebody, because they don't know the size that's going to be needed at any one given time, they send a range of sizes, and then in turn they'll check the tags whenever they come back in and say which one's missing, so that they know exactly which one left, which one they need to put back in, and how they need to bill. So there are some use cases out there in the UDI space today.
There was one interesting thing you said about too, is the idea that it works across lots of different areas of pharmaceutical supply chain, but also healthcare in general. But one of them is that often, in fact, almost all the time in technology, you really don't know how it's going to be used until it becomes ubiquitous, until everyone's using it. And then people find the real use cases, like the App Store and stuff like that. You don't really realize that eventually you're just going to hit a button and a car is going to come pick you up and take you to the airport. That was not an obvious outcome of making smartphones, right? There's a lot of other things. So one of them that we feel like is going to be really, really simpler is moving to FIFO, right? First expired, first out. If it was trivial to know where they are and what the expiration dates are, you would make that build into everything, because it would go, well, of course we'd get this one out first because this one's going to expire first, right? It would be just a natural part of it that extends to all different parts of the supply chain, but not until it really becomes ubiquitous, not until we see it all happening and it's on everything.
And I suppose
actually,
oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, I love the question that just came in, because you're 100% correct. And the question is, what is your opinion on how we can get past the chicken and egg problem where manufacturers aren't incentivized to tag because most of the value is seen downstream and like retail, yet downstream partners also have infrastructure costs that has a low ROI. So critical mass of products are until a critical mass of products are tagged. And no, you're 100% correct. And it's something that we look at. I've actually been looking at this a lot lately around the hospital clinical use and, how to, again, the challenge is that in the existing marketplace, you have to pick who you're tagging for, which of the available systems for clinical use that you're tagging for. Wholesalers, unfortunately, sitting in the middle, unless, Sean or some of the other wholesalers want to start a campaign where they're starting to ask manufacturers to do this, and it very may well happen with DSCSA at some point, depending on how the data rollout goes from end to end. Because again, nobody wants shortages, and this may be a way to help stem shortages in the long run. But it's one of those things that some of these use cases, I don't think the manufacturers are aware of how they're being utilized. And I don't think, until hospitals have a clean way to look at how they can utilize RFID and roll it forward. A lot of the use cases today are around security, around improving your waste. So throwing away expired product because you didn't use it, because you didn't realize you had it, or just putting things in the wrong place until it's too late to use them. So that's what a lot of the use cases are around today. And there's a lot of work being done in those areas. And there are hospitals piloting new areas all the time. But that's a really great point. And one of the things that I always lean on whenever manufacturers ask me, what's my ROI? And Aaron's heard me say this before, and I think Sean's heard me say this before. The best exception is the one that never leaves the manufacturer. So manufacturers will almost always use the barcodes to create the aggregation because the barcode is required by law. And part of ensuring that your barcode works the way it's supposed to work is scanning it as you're coming off the line and doing your verification, but then they're also building their aggregation off of that. And that's great. But after they manufacture the product, it goes and it sits for a period while they do tests on that batch to make sure that that batch meets efficacy and it's good to go. So that's a matter of months. And then they receive an order from someone like Sean, and then Sean, as they're picking Sean's order, they're kind of mixing and matching products throughout the warehouse. So now they're changing their aggregation from not what's inside of those cases, but where it was just a pallet of the same thing. Now they're packing some of X, some of Y, and some of Z all into a pallet for Sean, and they're using the barcodes on the outside to create that aggregation. If you have RFID on those lowest saleable units or in the cases, then you can validate the aggregation that you've done before it leaves your dock. I'm sorry, that was a long way to get there, but essentially what you've done is if there is a problem, you can rework that pallet at that point, not send that exception downstream. And if you're a company that believes that data issue, so if it's a case aggregation issue, that data issue needs a CAPA, then you're the only one doing that CAPA. You don't have to rely on your trade partners for any information, which means it's much cleaner, much quicker. And if it's just a pallet stacking issue, then you just restack the pallet, recreate your EPCIS, and then validate it and send it back out. So that's really where I'm at, is that there is ROI. It's just, I wish I had a silver bullet to tell you exactly how to get the chicken and the egg, but to my point earlier, Sean can't implement RFID until he has a solid workflow that
And
he
I
can lean
think
on.
that scenario you just outlined, I mean, that's a lot of cost that you just avoided by identifying that exception before it goes downstream to us, let alone to our customer. And I think we do have a little bit of an advantage potentially here in the RX supply chain with DSCSA because damages in read rates to the physical packaging is going to start causing us to return and reject product. It's going to start causing our customers to return and reject product, and that's going to all come with costs. So we potentially have a foot in the door here where we can use RFID to supplement what we're seeing in terms of read rates downstream. But I agree with you. It has to reach some degree of saturation before it can add value to everybody. But I do think this is one of those scenarios where the advantages are not exclusive to one leg of the supply chain. They really are shared across the network. But we have to get to some degree of saturation before that truly becomes apparent.
And Sean, this is the other thing this is the other reason why I think it's so important that exceptions get stopped at the manufacturer. I know you all have been doing some serious work about validating or verifying the product that you're receiving today against the EPCIS files that you're receiving. You all have been doing that for a while, if I'm not mistaken. But my concern, and I think as patients, we're all patients at some point, our concern should be that if an exception gets to Sean, and Sean has to quarantine a product, and it's from an inside of a case, it means that it wasn't found most likely until pick, pack, ship, which means it's now most likely a markout. I don't know what I know from my old wholesaler, it would be a markout. They wouldn't send somebody else to go pick it up. It would be a markout. That has the potential to impact service levels that are required by the manufacturer on top of the markout. And then if they are if that manufacturer has kind of bad data problems across the board, then it is the potential that a lot of their product gets marked out, which means now you're starting to create an artificial shortage based on data rather than a true shortage. And
I think that's the worst case scenario,
Yeah,
right? That now you have a patient that needs product and something that is likely otherwise good product. The issue is with the data or with the product packaging. We want to avoid that being the reason that somebody who ultimately needs that drug, it might be a life-saving drug, isn't getting it for a DSCSA reason. That's worst case scenario. That's patient safety. That's our brand. That's our manufacturer's brand. I mean, that's exactly what we want to avoid right there. And this is just another layer. It's a redundant system to help us avoid that nightmare scenario.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, this is the point also where we're like, okay, so the DSCSA is certainly there for patient safety, but if we don't do it right, we cause other risks with the data. So like how do you address this in the best way possible? And one of them, I made this argument before, and I think that it was also done at the HDA conference, is like, well, you want to make it follow the law of the DSCSA, but not necessarily where it's written, but the spirit. The spirit was to make everything as clear as possible. Even though the technology didn't exist at the time it was written in 2013, it might be better to address it as new technology comes out. And that's the argument behind what we did for the study. And I'm also thankful for Bahar and John Hatfield and Ethan for pushing for the study that we did with Axia, because we wouldn't have done this if they hadn't really said, you know what, we're going to stick our neck out. We're going to try something new. And we have partners. We've got Cencora, who's willing to do it. We've got CCL eAgile. In fact, there's quite a few other people I'll mention. Fresenius Kabi obviously brought the drugs, but GS1 and Telegard and Tari's vision also helped. I mean, it was really the vision that they had at Axia that said, we can do this. Because the first question they asked me when I showed this stuff, in fact, I showed my little palette of drugs that I made to prove this out, because I couldn't bring a pallet of drugs to the HGA show, right? For whatever reason, they wouldn't let me bring a pallet of drugs. Hard to believe. But the first thing they said was, well, what studies have been done? Well, I mean, this one, with the Axia study, but this is pretty much the only one right now that's already out there. So that's why I like what you were saying, Sean. I'm glad you're willing to, if we are required to do more, that you're willing to kind of stick your neck out and help as well, because I feel like the Axia really pushed hard to make this possible. And the only way it would have happened was with the team we have here, as well as the ones I just listed, to make it go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all here ultimately for patient safety, right? So as you mentioned, the spirit of DSCSA is to increase patient safety. It would be a tragedy if we allowed it to negatively impact that. And there are emergency use clauses. There's stuff in the law, but we don't even want to get there. We want to avoid the exception at the source.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to make it seem doom or gloom, but this is a complicated thing to do. There's a reason why it's taken as long as it's taken to get us to where we're at with the DSCSA, where it's actually, I'm super excited. I was getting to the point that I didn't know that I would see it actually happen within my work span. So, I mean, it's just complex. There's a lot that has to work. There's a lot of connections that have to be made. And inside of those connections, there's a lot of routing that has to occur by different solution providers, different storage entities. It gets very complex very quickly. And so that's really the challenge, is that it's not, I don't believe we're going to have artificial shortages. I'm going to be on the positive side of that. But I also think anything we can do to keep product ending up in quarantine midstream is probably the best thing we can do, because it's not just the law that sits on this. We have business agreements that have certain requirements around them that have been made between purchasers and suppliers, and all of that feeds into each other. It's a very complex supply chain, and stopping product has a lot of implications across not just the patients, businesses, and then the supply chain in general. So anything you can do to keep it moving and keeping the products doing what they're supposed to do, which is getting to the front line where patients can take them, the better off we'll all be. I think literally.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Very good point. Well, we're down to our last few minutes here. So I thought I'd give everybody an opportunity to kind of give us a key summary or bullet point from our discussion today. I was just going to lead off, the Axia pilot really demonstrated that RAIN RFID coupled with GS1 interoperability brought efficiency and security to the distributors, ensured scalable benefits for a faster, more accurate healthcare supply chain. I was going to let any one of you jump in on any other bullet points just for a key takeaway for our listeners.
it's whatever Sean says is what I'm going to go with.
I was going to say, this study just proved to me that the technology works. Proof of concept. There's no reason not to pursue RFID for fear that the technology might not be at a stage where it's able to support what we're asking of it. The technology works. As Andrew brought up, there's lots of other challenges that we have to tackle to get this at saturation. And I think there's a lot of reasons to tackle those challenges. I think that's the future of kind of what the Axia efforts are going to look like with regards to RFID. And I think there's a lot of reason to get there. As Andrew said, it's a complex system. It's already complex. It's already complicated. We just want to find ways that we can add value to patients and ultimately make a safer and more secure supply chain.
Yeah. And you talked about that little last section, with this leading edge, bleeding edge technology. Everybody loves it, but nobody wants to be first. And everybody wants to see it proved out first and in a controlled world and have somebody take it on. And I think we're slowly evolving to that point. So, but we've talked a lot about the Axia report. Just remind everybody who's listening, that report is available at axia.msu.edu under the Pharma End-to-End RFID pilot. Be sure to join us in session 3, where we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into RFID's future with our guest, David Berkowitz from Omnicell and Gwen Volpe from Fresenius Kabi. So at this time, I'd like to again thank our guests, Andrew Meyer from GS1, Sean Murphy from Cencora, and Aaron Sundman from CCL eAgile, as well as everybody who listened in today. And I'm now going to send it back to Elizabeth at RAIN for any last-minute housekeeping. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Dirk. I just wanted to thank you as a moderator, and just wanted to remind everyone that our next session is on the 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So tune in then to find the ending, and that will be our last session.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
You're awesome.